What would you do if you discovered your entire childhood was built on a lie that 43 children vanished in one winter night, and no one ever asked why? Some stories don't just break your heart. They question your faith in humanity. If you've ever witnessed silence protecting the powerful, speak up. Tell us where you're watching from, and share your thoughts, because your voice might be the one that finally sets the truth free. The night air carried the scent of rust and pine. Ruth Carver's flashlight trembled in her hand as she stepped through the splintered doorway of the old Willow Creek orphanage. Dust floated in the air like ghosts caught between time and truth. Every creak of the wooden floor echoed as if the house itself remembered what had happened here. She wasn't supposed to be here. The county had sealed the property decades ago, claiming gas contamination. But Ruth knew a cover-up when she saw one. She'd spent 20 years chasing stories of corruption, but this one felt different, personal, heavier, like a weight she'd carried without knowing why. Her boots brushed across faded linoleum tiles until the beam of light struck something odd, a patch of wall painted a slightly lighter shade than the rest. She pushed. It shifted with a groan. Behind it, a narrow passage. Cold air rushed out, and in that stillness she heard a faint sound, almost like a lullaby. Ruth lifted her light. Dozens of porcelain eyes stared back at her. The room was lined with shelves, each holding a doll dressed in tiny handmade clothes. Their faces were cracked, but carefully dusted, as if someone had tended to them long after the world had stopped caring. And at the base of every doll, an old paper tag with a name and a date. She knelt and read the nearest one aloud. Evelyn Carter, December 15, 1971. Her heart stuttered. She recognized the date. It matched the orphanage's last recorded day of operation. As she reached for another doll, her fingers brushed against something inside its hollow frame. Carefully, she pried the back open. A folded photograph slipped out, an ultrasound image marked Grace C., age 15. The flashlight flickered. Ruth froze. Grace Carver. Her mother's name. The air thickened, heavy, and electric. Outside, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the hills. Ruth's breath caught as realization bled into fear. She turned toward the doorway. A shadow moved. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw the silhouette of a child standing in the corridor. Then it vanished. Ruth whispered into the dark, "Who's still here?" Morning sunlight spilled through the cracked blinds of Dolly's diner, painting long stripes across the linoleum floor. Ruth Carver sat in a corner booth, hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug, trying to make sense of what she'd seen the night before. Her recorder lay on the table beside a napkin covered in scribbled names. Evelyn Carter, Thomas Lane, Maria Holt, 43 in all. The waitress, a soft-spoken woman with silver hair, topped off her cup. "You're not from around here, are you?" Ruth smiled faintly. "No, just passing through." But she wasn't. She'd come to Willow County for answers, and the ghosts of that orphanage weren't letting her leave. Across the diner, a man in a faded denim jacket sat alone, stirring his coffee too long. When their eyes met, he nodded once, cautious, familiar. He rose, slid into the seat across from her, and spoke without introduction. "You went inside, didn't you?" Ruth's pulse jumped. "Who are you?" "Name's Earl Hensley, groundskeeper back when that place was still full of kids." His voice was gravel rough, worn from years of silence. "You shouldn't have gone there. Some things in Willow Creek are meant to stay buried." She leaned forward. 43 children vanished in one night. I found their names, their dolls, even my mother's name. Are you telling me that's not worth digging up? Earl's eyes flicked to the window, scanning the quiet street. People here owe Vernon Whitmore too much to ask questions. He owned the mills, the newspaper, the county board. If you start pulling threads, you'll find his hands on every one of them. "Vernon Whitmore?" Ruth repeated. The name rang through her chest like a warning bell. She'd seen it on donation plaques, hospital wings, even the library foundation she'd called that morning. Earl slid a folded page across the table. "Found this cleaning out the barn after the fire in 71. You might want to see it." It was a ledger yellowed, water-stained. 43 entries. Each had a name, a date, and beside it, a single word. Placed. When Ruth looked up, Earl was already leaving, his voice low as he passed her shoulder. "Don't go back there after dark." The door shut behind him, and the diner's bell gave one last, lonely chime. Outside, the wind picked up, swirling dead leaves down Main Street. Ruth gathered her things, heart pounding, determination sharpening into fear. She didn't notice the black sedan parked across the street, engine running, driver motionless behind tinted glass. As she started her car, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Stop digging, Miss Carver. Some graves are better left closed." She stared at the screen, the reflection of her own eyes trembling in the glass, then whispered, "That's the problem with secrets. They never stay buried." Thunder rolled again, somewhere far beyond the hills, as Ruth turned the key and drove back toward Willow Creek. The dirt road to Willow Creek twisted through a tunnel of pine and shadow. Ruth's rental car rattled over loose gravel as she replayed Earl's warning in her mind. Don't go back there after dark. But it was already dusk, the sky bruised purple over the tree line. Some truths couldn't wait for morning. When the orphanage came into view, it looked even more hollow than before. Windows like empty eyes, bricks crumbling beneath ivy and years of rain. Ruth parked near the collapsed gate, grabbed her flashlight and the ledger, and stepped out into the thick silence. Inside, the air felt heavier, like it remembered fear. Her light danced across faded murals, painted suns, paper angels, a classroom schedule still nailed to the wall. The 15th of December 1970, Christmas dinner. Her stomach twisted. She moved toward the west wing, retracing last night's steps, when a noise stopped her, the faint scrape of movement above. She froze, scanning the stairwell. Dust drifted down from the landing. Someone was up there. "Hello?" Her voice barely carried. No answer. Only the sound of wood settling and, faintly, something else humming. The same lullaby she'd heard before. Ruth's breath hitched. The flashlight trembled in her hand as she climbed, every step complaining beneath her weight. At the top, the hallway stretched into darkness. Doors stood ajar, rooms gutted. But at the far end, a faint glow pulsed from behind a half-open door. She approached slowly, heart hammering. Inside, candles burned on a metal desk. A woman sat behind them, mid-60s, neatly dressed, her face pale as paper. "I knew someone would come back," she said softly. "I've been waiting." Ruth steadied herself. "Who are you?" "Annette Briggs," the woman whispered. "I worked here. The night they took the children." Ruth's throat tightened. "You know what happened?" Annette's eyes glistened. "I made the dolls." The words fell like stones. "He told me it was a Christmas project. Said the children could put their treasures inside keepsakes to collect after their visits. They were so excited." She gripped the edge of the desk, but they never came back. Ruth pulled the ledger from her bag and laid it down. 43 names. My mother's among them, Grace Carver. Annette's expression broke. Grace, the pregnant girl. He called her a special case. Who? Vernon Whitmore. The name chilled the air. Annette leaned closer. He said he'd found homes for them. But I saw the trucks that night. No agency, no records, just men loading children like boxes. Ruth swallowed hard. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Annette's hands trembled. "I tried. He had me committed, said I was delusional. When I got out, he gave me a job, right under his thumb. 40 years of silence." Lightning flashed outside, throwing their shadows long against the wall. Annette pressed a small key into Ruth's palm. "If you really want to know, find his house on Hollow Ridge Road. There's a safe in his study. That's where he keeps what's left of them." Ruth looked down at the key, feeling its cold weight. When she glanced back up, Annette was gone, the candles still burning, the chair empty. Her flashlight flickered once more, then went out. Somewhere down the hall, a door slammed shut. For a heartbeat, Ruth thought she was dreaming. The voice was faint, tremoring through the dark hall like a memory trying to find its way home. "Mom," she whispered. Her flashlight flicked on again, weak but steady. The beam cut through the black and landed on a woman standing at the far end of the corridor, thin, gray-haired, wearing a faded blue robe. Her eyes, though clouded with confusion, were unmistakable. Grace Carver. Ruth froze, unable to breathe. 40 years of absence collapsed into that single moment. "Mom, it's me, Ruth." Grace blinked as if the name hurt to hear. "No, my baby died," she murmured. "They told me she died." Vernon's voice slid in, smooth as oil. "She's confused, Miss Carver. Always has been. That's why she's under my care." Ruth spun toward him, fury shaking her. "You drugged her. You locked her away." He took a step closer, raising a hand as though calming a child. "I gave her peace. The truth would have broken her long ago. You'd be wise to let her rest." Grace's gaze flickered between them, fear dawning in her eyes. "Vernon, you said my daughter." "She's fine," he interrupted sharply. "You just need your medication." Ruth reached for her mother. "Don't listen to him. He lied to you, Mom. I'm alive. He sold you. He sold me." Grace's hands trembled as she touched Ruth's face. Her thumb brushed the old scar on Ruth's cheek, the one Ruth had gotten as a child from falling off a bike. Grace gasped softly. This is real." Behind them, Vernon moved toward the wall. Ruth caught the metallic click of a drawer. Her instincts screamed. She shoved Grace behind her just as lightning illuminated a gun in Vernon's hand. "Put it down," Ruth shouted. Vernon's calm broke. "You don't understand, Miss Carver. Without me, none of this ever would have survived. Those children were nothing until I made them something. I gave them families, purpose. Even you." Ruth's voice cracked. "You gave them nightmares." A figure appeared behind Vernon Earl Hensley, soaked from the storm, shotgun steady in his hands. "Step away from her." "Whitmore." For a second, time stopped. Then, the front doors burst open. Agents flooded in FBI jackets flashing, commands echoing through the hall. Vernon's gun hit the floor. Ruth turned to see Annette Briggs among the agents, her eyes full of tears. "I told them everything," she said, voice shaking. 40 years too late, but not tonight. Vernon didn't resist as they cuffed him. He only smiled, thin, reptilian. "You think this changes anything?" "People forget. They always do." Ruth held up her phone, recording the moment. "Not this time." Outside, the rain eased into a soft drizzle. Agents loaded boxes from the study files, ledgers, photographs. Ruth stood on the porch beside her mother, watching the flashing lights carve the night. Grace leaned against her, fragile but awake. "You came back for me," she whispered. "I never stopped looking," Ruth said, voice breaking. "You just didn't know." And from somewhere deep inside the mansion, a sound drifted through the halls, a child's lullaby carried faintly through the rain. Ruth turned toward the door, heart pounding. "Did you hear that?" Grace nodded slowly. "Yes," she said, voice barely above a breath. "They're still waiting." Morning broke gray and heavy over Hollow Ridge. Rain had washed the estate clean, but the air still smelled of rot and secrets. The Whitmore mansion was now a crime scene, FBI tape fluttering across the iron gates, news vans clogging the gravel road, microphones hungry for a quote that could fit 40 years of horror into 30 seconds. Ruth Carver stood on the porch, wrapped in a borrowed coat. Her mother's frail hand laced through hers. Grace hadn't spoken much since the night before. She just stared at the house with the quiet, hollow focus of someone watching her own ghost walk out of the front door. An agent approached a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and rain-spotted glasses. "Agent Diana Brooks, FBI. You're Ruth Carver, right?" Ruth nodded. Brooks handed her a folder sealed in plastic. "We cataloged everything from the study files. Ledgers, photos, 43 children documented. Your mother's case was listed as W23, special circumstances." Ruth's stomach twisted. "And the others?" Brooks hesitated. 31 were sold through private placements. 12 were transferred to research facilities, Marshfield Institute in Oregon and Blackwood Research in Maryland. Some of them... She stopped herself. "Let's just say not all made it." Grace's voice cracked the silence. "He told me they were going to families, that they'd be loved." Brooks's tone softened. "Some were, but not all love is born from good beginnings, ma'am." A camera flash went off near the gate, and Grace flinched. Ruth stepped in front of her, glaring toward the crowd. "They're turning this into a headline." "That's what happens when monsters wear suits," Brooks said. "People want to see what evil looks like when it smiles." Annette Briggs appeared on the porch steps, hair damp, eyes hollow but alive. She carried a cardboard box sealed with FBI tape. "I thought you should have this," she said. "They pulled it from Vernon's storage unit off Route 12. It's the children's personal effects, the ones who never came back." Ruth opened the box. Inside were the dolls, 43 of them, cracked but intact, their names still written on fading tags. She lifted one with trembling hands. It wore a yellow dress. Inside, wrapped in brittle paper, was the ultrasound photo of her mother's pregnancy, the first picture of herself. Grace reached out, touching the photo with reverence. "I saved it," she whispered. "They said I'd show it to my baby someday. I just didn't know someday would take 40 years. Ruth blinked away tears. "You did show me, Mom. You did." A voice called from the driveway. "Miss Carver." It was Richard Morrison, the man she'd met briefly during the investigation. He was one of the children from the ledger, now in his late 40s, his face drawn but steady. Behind him stood 2 women and an older man. "We came because of you," Richard said. "We saw the broadcast. We all have pieces of the same story." Ruth stepped closer. "You were one of them?" He nodded. "W-18, bought in Boston. My parents said it was a private adoption. But my birth name was Thomas Randall. My sister Lisa was W-19. We thought we were orphans. Turns out we were merchandise." Grace's hand went to her heart. "I remember you," she whispered. "You used to read to the younger ones before bed." Richard's eyes welled. "You remember me?" "I remember all of you," Grace said softly. "Every single child." Vernon took. Agent Brooks stepped forward. "We'll be organizing a survivor meeting at the community center in Millstone County. We'd like you both there." Ruth looked down at the dolls, then at the faces gathering in the rain, the broken pieces of 43 lives slowly finding their way back together. "We'll be there," she said. Brooks nodded and turned away, radio crackling as she disappeared toward the waiting cars. Grace looked up at her daughter. "Do you think they'll ever be whole again?" Ruth squeezed her hand. "Maybe not whole," she said quietly, "but no longer lost." As the agents drove off, Ruth glanced back at the mansion one last time. Through the broken windows, she swore she saw a flicker of movement, a child's shadow darting past the curtains, small and fleeting as breath. She didn't tell her mother. Some hauntings, she thought, weren't there to scare you. They were just waiting to be seen. The Willow Creek Community Center hadn't seen this many people in decades. The old gym smelled of coffee, damp coats, and something electric hope mixed with heartbreak. Rows of folding chairs filled the room, everyone occupied. Survivors from across the country had come, carrying fragments of memories they weren't sure they wanted back. At the front sat Ruth and Grace Carver, surrounded by faces that had once been names in a ledger. Richard Morrison, Lisa Randall, Mary Catherine O'Brien, Michael Patterson. They spoke in quiet bursts, bits of memory, half-remembered songs, the way the hallways of the orphanage echoed at night. When Agent Diana Brooks took the microphone, the crowd fell silent. 43 children vanished from Willow Creek Orphanage on December 15, 1970, she began. As of this morning, we've confirmed 31 survivors, 12 confirmed deceased. We're still searching for the rest. Murmurs rippled through the room. Grace's fingers twisted around her handkerchief. Ruth reached over, steadying her. Brooks continued. Vernon Whitmore is in federal custody. The Department of Justice has charged him with 43 counts of human trafficking, 12 counts of murder by proxy, and multiple acts of fraud. He's pleading not guilty. A low growl of anger rolled through the audience. Someone muttered, "Monster." Richard Morrison stood. "He sold us like furniture. How can he plead not guilty?" Brooks exhaled. "Because men like him always believe what they did was business, not sin." The microphone passed from hand to hand. Lisa spoke first. "I don't even remember leaving that night. Just bright lights and someone saying, 'Be good. They're your new family.'" Mary Catherine's voice trembled. "They told me to put my Bible in the doll so I wouldn't lose it. I never saw it again until now." Ruth opened the box beside her. 43 dolls, each carefully tagged and catalogued, waited to be returned. The survivors came forward one by one, touching the relics of their lost selves. Some wept, some simply stared, too hollow for tears. Grace watched, whispering the names like a prayer. Tommy, Alice, Catherine, the twins. A reporter approached Ruth quietly. "You're the one who exposed Whitmore, right? What made you start digging?" Ruth looked around at the faces, adults who had once been children waiting to be chosen. "Because my mother was one of them," she said, "and because truth only dies if we stop looking." Applause rippled through the hall, soft but rising like a tide. For the first time, the survivors weren't just victims, they were witnesses, anchors of their own history. After the meeting, Ruth found Annette Briggs standing by the exit, staring at the rain beyond the glass doors. She looked older, smaller somehow, but her eyes had a light that hadn't been there before. "I saw your testimony," Ruth said. "You were brave." Annette shook her head. "No, just tired of being afraid. I spent 40 years keeping secrets for a man who ruined lives. I won't let him have another day of my silence." Grace approached, her voice gentle. "You saved those children in the end, Annette." Annette smiled through tears. "I should have saved them then." Ruth placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're saving what's left now." From across the room, an agent called out, "Ruth, there's something you should see." He handed her a tablet showing a live courtroom feed. Vernon Whitmore sat in a wheelchair, his lawyer whispering into his ear. The judge was reading charges. And then, to everyone's shock, Vernon requested to speak. His voice crackled through the speaker. "I don't deny what I did, but I didn't act alone." The room went silent. Ruth's pulse thundered. Several of those families, Vernon said, knew exactly what they were buying. Wealthy people, respectable names. They paid extra for discretion. Gasps spread like wildfire. Grace covered her mouth. Richard whispered, "He's naming them." The camera panned to the courtroom, where Vernon began listing names, business leaders, judges, politicians, people whose reputations would crumble in seconds. Ruth closed her eyes, the room spinning. The story wasn't over. It was bigger, darker, deeper than she'd ever imagined. She whispered to her mother, "He's not just falling. He's taking half the county with him." Grace's voice trembled. "Then we have to stand taller." Outside, thunder rolled again over Willow Creek. But this time, it sounded less like a warning, more like an ending coming undone. A year later, Washington, D.C. shimmered under the pale light of early spring. The National Museum of Justice had opened its newest exhibit that morning, the Willow Creek Children. Crowds moved slowly beneath glass cases holding documents, photographs, and the 43 dolls once found in the orphanage basement. Each tag now bore not just a name, but a story. Ruth Carver stood near the center display beside her mother, Grace, watching people pause and whisper. The plaque on the wall read, "They were never lost, only forgotten, until someone remembered." Grace's eyes glistened. "I never thought we'd see this day." Ruth smiled softly. "Neither did I, but truth has a way of surviving." Nearby, a group of school children pressed close to the glass. One little boy pointed to a cracked porcelain face and whispered, "She looks sad." His teacher replied, "She's not sad anymore. She's been found." Annette Briggs appeared beside them, dressed in quiet gray, her hands clasped together. "You did it," she said to Ruth. "You made them remember." Ruth shook her head. "We all did. The ones who spoke, the ones who testified, the ones who lived long enough to be heard." Flashbulbs popped as journalists circled the exhibit. On a small stage, Agent Diana Brooks addressed the crowd. "This isn't just history, it's a promise. Every name you see here represents a child who mattered. Every silence we break keeps it from happening again." Grace leaned close to her daughter. "You think they'll really remember? In 50 years? Ruth's voice softened. "If they don't, I'll remind them." The ceremony ended, but Ruth lingered. As the room emptied, she noticed something resting on the corner of the display case, an unmarked envelope. No one had seen who left it. Her name was written across the front in neat, old-fashioned cursive, Miss R. Carver. She tore it open. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph, grainy, color-washed with age. It showed a group of children standing in front of a weather-beaten wooden building. Behind them, a mountain range rose sharp against the horizon. Scrawled on the back were 4 words, Route 23, Utah. 1971. Ruth's pulse quickened. She studied the faces 10 children, some smiling, some blank. But one in the center caught her breath. A little girl holding a yellow-dressed doll, identical to the last one found in Vernon Whitmore's collection. The 43rd child, the one still officially unaccounted for. Grace looked over her shoulder. "What is it?" Ruth turned the photo so her mother could see. "Proof," she said quietly. "They didn't all disappear that night. At least one of them survived." Annette approached, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "Another clue?" Ruth nodded. "Maybe more than that. The handwriting, it's not Vernon's. Someone wanted me to find this." She slipped the Polaroid into her coat pocket. Outside, the museum steps glowed gold in the fading afternoon light. Reporters waited below, cameras ready, shouting her name. Ruth paused at the door and glanced back at the display one last time. 43 silent witnesses staring through glass, forever telling their story. She whispered, "You're not forgotten. Not one of you." Then she took her mother's hand, walking into the crowd. Grace squeezed gently. "So where do we go now?" Ruth smiled faintly, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Route 23, she said. "I think they're still waiting." The camera would have followed them down the museum steps, 2 women walking into the wind, framed by the echo of children's laughter and a haunting lullaby carried faintly on the breeze. Fade to black. Text appeared on screen, inspired by true events. 43 children vanished in 1970. 31 found. 12 lost. Their story became a promise never again. And somewhere in the Utah desert, a forgotten cabin waited, sunlight flickering through its broken window, a single yellow-dressed doll sitting upright on the dusty floor, eyes open, as if listening. The Willow Creek children is not just a story about crime, it is a mirror held to the soul of a society that too often forgets its weakest voices. It reminds us that evil rarely begins with monsters. It begins with silence, with the moments we choose to look away. The story speaks to the enduring power of truth, how even after decades of lies, one small act of courage can reopen the doors of justice. Ruth and Grace's journey shows that memory is not a burden, but a form of resistance. Through pain, they prove that love survives deception, and that healing begins the moment we decide to face what hurt us. For the audience, especially those who have lost faith in justice or humanity, this story rekindles something sacred, the belief that redemption is still possible, even in a broken world. It teaches that time cannot erase what is real, and that every forgotten name deserves to be spoken again. In the end, the Willow Creek children gives us a quiet but powerful truth, that courage is contagious, and that remembering, truly remembering, is how we keep innocence alive.